and in the future. And that's those are the kind of issues that will be of the order that we're trying to deal with out there in Fort Bragg. And they're the kind of issues we have to look at in terms of where we are going as a county as we face the emerging technologies and the problems that are coming up pretty quickly and pretty powerfully. This is not the time for us to be talking about shifting from steam power to nuclear power. This is not the time for us to be talking about changing horses in the middle, not of a stream, but an ocean. This is a time where we should figure out where we are right now, what are our problems, make an effort to solve those problems, and then say, okay, come on, anybody, including Solid Waste of Willits, come bring forward if you have better ideas so we can properly evaluate this. But this is not a response. My point here is this. This is not a responsible way for a evaluation committee, which we are right now, to look at a proposal. The proposal is simply incomplete, raises more questions, that it's not our job as the evaluation committee to answer those. It is the responsibility of the proposer. Mr. Pinches seems to think that some of these things will work out, and he was talking about how easy it'll be to shift people. Maybe it will be, but that's so far down the road, and that is essentially a trivial concern when we're talking about what happens with this kind of net county cost and how it's impacted and what problems will be generated at different points as we move through this process. We don't have the luxury of investing your very expensive time and our not so expensive time in the process of trying to figure out what somebody is bringing to us. And it might be the greatest idea in the world, but you got to do a better job of presenting it than what has been presented here, because it's just not up to standard for a project being proposed of this magnitude in this context at this time. And so in that regard here, I would say go back to the drawing board. We need to invest more time and effort in the problems that the county faces under current conditions without looking out there what is possible. There are a million things that are possible out there. We do not have an obligation to take into account any one of those million things until we know where we stand with regard to this whole process. And I find this very, very debilitating and very enervating to be involved in going through this amount of documentation here for a proposal that is partially done, somewhat interesting, but again, does not address the real issues, and it is not our responsibility. So I'm going to repeat this because, as we said the last time, and it seems to have gotten lost. It is not our responsibility to figure out what's wrong with this, what's right with this, what the outcomes will be, and so forth. That is the responsibility of the agency or organization or corporation or individual who proposes we do something drastically different from what we are doing right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Delaware, do you have a comment?
Just a couple.
I'd really like to kind of
Understood,
wrap
Mr.
this
Chair.
up, and we'll get to Mr. Ward.
Understood. And
Thank
I have
you.
a couple very quick comments because I do want to hear from Mr. Ward.
Thank you.
But I find it interesting that, we're complaining about the quality of this, yet we directed you not to give any information, or not to spend any time on it. But what a, geez. To me, that's a little, I don't quite buy that one. If what I took out of the last conversation we had was we didn't want the Transportation Department, Solid Waste Division, putting together the proposal. Proposal needed to come from Mr. Ward. I didn't, at least my recollection was, don't provide any information. That to me is completely illogical, would made no sense. I would have said it at the time if that was what I thought was the direction the board was going. Like I stated, and there's no pun intended, garbage in, garbage out. If we're not going to cooperate and provide information that any Joe public can get, then we're going to have a lot of questions, which I'm hoping to get some of those answered from Mr. Ward. The other part I have a real hard time with is the statement, and I hear it every single time something new is proposed, it's not the time. It's not the time. We can't do it right now, it's not the time. Well, when is the time? It's usually, well, we can't do it right now, it's budget, it's not the time. Well, we haven't done budgets yet. We're in the process. So if we're going to do something, to me, this would be the time. Not the time doesn't fly. It's always the time when we are facing millions of dollars of deficit coming up here. It's the time. It's the time to find a way to do business better. When I was a kid, the municipalities owned the garbage trucks and went around picking up the garbage. If it's such a great deal, why don't we get back into the business? Cancel our franchise agreements and we'll get into the garbage business if it's such a great deal, if privatization doesn't work. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I'm at least willing and open-minded enough to hear and see. But I don't want to get in the garbage business any more than we already are. So I'd like to hear from Mr. Ward, Mr. Chairman, because I think it's the time.
Just a quick comment. First
Supervisor
of all, I
Lynch.
believe, because there are a lot of tax dollars of Mendocino County involved, it is this Board of Supervisors' responsibility. If it's not our responsibility, who? And I look at this a little bit simpler, maybe. You know, as I stated in my first comments, this proposal was done in the North County 10, 11, 12 years ago. It's had a dozen years to work. It's worked completely. Outside of the Covelo subsidy, which maybe it's time to pare that down and let the folks in Covelo pay the full cost of their trash over there. I'm not totally opposed to that. But the point of it is, that's the only place there's a subsidy. But it's worked for a dozen years now. It's nothing new. It's no new invention. If a 12-year study on how something works isn't good enough, what is? I mean, it's worked. Everybody could admit. David, you just admitted what a fine job Solid Waste of Willits has done. All Solid Waste is proposing to do the rest of the county, the area they franchise they hold, and Waste Management will do the other side. The functions of our landfills, we can't pass off those responsibilities. We're going to still have to have a solid waste division for probably at least for the next 25, 30 years. I mean, that's a fact, because there's functions. I mean, it'd be great if somebody come in and say, hey, we'll privatize and take care of your landfill and post-closure plans and whatnot. But that ain't gonna happen. So we still have a function. We still have plenty of work for our solid waste. But we've done this in the North County, you know, North County, Lake and Laytonville, and Covelo. We still have the landfills there and the monitoring, but Solid Waste of Willits has a transfer station and the buyback facilities. That's all that's being proposed here. It's really simple. It's really not that complicated. It's been done for a dozen years.
Thanks, Supervisor. Mr. Ward and your representative, please provide us some information.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Emmett Jones, and I've worked with Jerry Ward for quite a long time. And I'd like to thank you for the time you're spending today on this solid waste issue. I'd like to start by saying that I think there's more agreement in the room than might at first blush appear. I'd like to echo the fact that we're not here to eliminate people's jobs. The city of Fort Bragg is clearly a player and needs to be part of this concept because they are a partner in one of the bigger transfer stations. And the net cost to the county and the ratepayer is what this should all be about. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes making a few points, and then I'll answer questions or defer to Mr. Ward. Solid Waste of Willits has been and tries to continue to be a problem solver, and not just a problem solver so that we make money, but often we have found the ability to solve problems where it's win-win, everybody comes out better, and we create employment, which is not a bad thing in this county, especially in the North County where Jerry has most of his operations. And in doing that, everybody benefits. When we come up with a proposal, we're thinking about the ratepayer. That's the curbside customer, that's the self-hauler, and as it turns out, and this is sometimes missed, the curbside customer is the self-hauler, because when they have a couch, they have to take it to the transfer station. And this question that Supervisor Smith talked about, who's paying their fair share, you know, sometimes people say, well, boy, the curbside person isn't paying enough because they take their couch and they get a free ride. And other people are